What does it take for one man to become the nightmare of an entire empire? And not just any empire, but the largest the world had ever seen. In the 19th century, as the British Empire was busy painting the globe red, it met its match, not on the grand battlefields of Europe, but in the rugged, sun-scorched mountains of southern Africa. Here, in a kingdom carved from rock and defiance, a single leader forged an army, built an economy on guns, and created a fortress that seemed completely impenetrable. He was a visionary, a unifier, and a man who refused to bow. When the most powerful military on earth came for him, they expected a swift, easy colonial victory. What they got instead was a tactical genius who would hand them one humiliating defeat after another. This is the story of Sekhukhune I, the great king of the Bapedi people, the man who dared to defy the world's greatest power and became their ultimate nightmare. You can't understand Sekhukhune without understanding the world he was born into. The mid-19th century in southern Africa was a crucible of conflict. The landscape was a complex mosaic of powerful African kingdoms, but this ancient order was being violently torn apart. From the south came the Voortrekkers, rugged Boer settlers of Dutch descent, trekking inland with wagons, Bibles, and rifles, carving out new republics on land that wasn't theirs. From the coast, the influence of the British Empire crept inwards, driven by strategic ambition, missionary zeal, and an insatiable hunger for resources. Into this pressure cooker, the kingdom of the Bapedi had risen. They had been forged into a formidable power by a line of shrewd kings. Their home was the Transvaal, a region of dramatic mountains and fertile valleys, a land that would soon be discovered to be fabulously rich in minerals. Sekhukhune's father, King Sekhwati, was a master of survival. He had weathered the storm of the Imprisonment, a period of widespread chaos and warfare, and had learned to play a careful game of diplomacy and defense against the encroaching Boers. He knew when to fight and when to negotiate, establishing his capital on hills so impenetrable his warriors could repel almost any invader. It was into this legacy of resistance that Sekhukhune was born around the year 1815. He grew up not in a time of peace, but in an era where the survival of his people depended on constant vigilance. He watched his father navigate the treacherous political currents, learning from every Boer demand and every diplomatic maneuver. He understood that the world was changing and that the old ways alone weren't going to be enough. In September 1861, King Sekhwati died, and the kingdom was immediately plunged into a succession crisis. By tradition, the heir was Sekhukhune's half-brother, Mampuru II. Mampuru was the son of the candle wife, a wife taken specifically to produce an heir. But Sekhukhune was older, more experienced, and possessed an ambition that custom couldn't contain. He believed the throne was his by right of strength. What happened next was swift and brutal. Backed by his loyal regiment, Sekhukhune moved to seize power. He didn't just challenge Mampuru. He decisively crushed his opposition, killing Mampuru's key advisors to eliminate any threat. It was a violent usurpation. Yet in this moment of raw power, Sekhukhune showed a deep understanding of his own culture. He allowed Mampuru, his defeated rival, to flee the kingdom unharmed. This act, adhering to the tradition of not spilling royal blood after a contest, was a calculated move. It showed that while he was willing to break the rules, he wasn't a thoughtless tyrant. He was a pragmatist who understood that true power required not just force, but the performance of legitimacy. With the throne secured, Sekhukhune I, now the undisputed king of the Bapedi, set his sights on a goal far greater than mere survival. He wouldn't just resist the invaders. He would build a kingdom so strong that no empire, Boer or British, could ever break it. Sekhukhune's reign wasn't just a continuation of his father's policies. It was a radical upgrade. He looked at the encroaching colonial world, not with fear, but with cold, hard calculation. He saw the invaders' thirst for land and labor, and instead of just defending against it, he devised a plan to turn the colonial economy against itself. His goal, to build a powerful, centralized state with a modern army. His first project was defense. Sekhukhune moved his capital into the Leolo Mountains, a natural citadel of breathtaking strategic value. This wasn't just a single mountain, but a formidable cluster of steep, rocky hills and hidden caves. Sekhukhune transformed this landscape into a sophisticated defensive network. He fortified the peaks, hid armories in the caves, and created a series of interlinked strongholds. His main fortress, Taba Mosega, became the heart of this mountain kingdom, a place his enemies would describe as utterly impenetrable. But a fortress is useless without the means to defend it, and Sekhukhune knew spears and shields wouldn't stop rifles. He needed guns, lots of them, and guns cost money. This led to the most revolutionary part of his rule, a state-controlled economic policy designed to arm his nation. Sekhukhune sent his kingdom's young men, the Majaha, to work in the newly opened diamond mines of Kimberley and on white-owned farms. These men weren't just migrant laborers seeking personal wealth. They were, in effect, agents of the Bapedi state. A significant portion of the wages they earned was sent directly back to the kingdom's treasury. It was a state-sponsored labor program with a single, clear objective. That money was used for one primary purpose: buying modern firearms. Sekhukhune established a sophisticated procurement network, sending agents hundreds of miles to the port of Delagoa Bay in modern-day Mozambique to trade with Portuguese merchants for thousands of rifles and ammunition. While other leaders might trade away land or cattle for a handful of guns, Sekhukhune was using cash. He was effectively weaponizing the labor force, turning the sweat of his people in colonial mines into the steel of their defense at home. This system didn't just arm his kingdom, it also limited the ability of the nearby Boer republics to exploit labor. By controlling the flow of workers, Sekhukhune could exert economic pressure on his rivals. His kingdom grew wealthy in cash and firepower, and thus became one of the best-armed African states in the region. But Sekhukhune wasn't just a military strategist. He was a shrewd diplomat who built alliances with other powerful African leaders. By the early 1870s, he had achieved something remarkable: a consolidated, centralized kingdom with a well-armed army presiding over a unique cash-based economy that funded its own defense. He was no longer just another chief in the eyes of the colonizers. He was a king with a modern vision, and his powerful state stood as a direct obstacle to their ambitions. A collision was inevitable. By 1876, Sekhukhune's powerful kingdom had become an intolerable thorn in the side of the neighboring South African Republic. The Republic's president, Thomas Francois Burgers, was a man with grand ambitions, but Sekhukhune's domain sat right in his way, projecting an image of African strength that directly challenged the Boer worldview. Land disputes were constant. The Boers claimed vast tracts of Bapedi territory based on flimsy treaties, while Sekhukhune steadfastly refused to recognize their authority. For President Burgers, this was more than enough pretext for war. He believed a swift victory would solve his political problems and open up the land for settlement. On May 16, 1876, the South African Republic declared war. President Burgers, oozing confidence, decided to lead the main Boer commando himself. On paper, the odds were stacked against the Bapedi. The Boers brought modern artillery and secured a powerful ally, a large army of Swazi warriors, the traditional enemies of the Bapedi. The plan was a classic two-pronged assault. The Swazi would storm the Bapedi strongholds while the Boer commando provided covering fire. The initial target was a key settlement defended by Sekhukhune half-brother, Johannes Dinkwanyane. The Swazi, true to their reputation, launched a furious assault and breached the defenses. Dinkwanyane and many of his followers were killed. But here, the Boer plan began to unravel spectacularly. During the Swazi assault, the Boer commando largely held back. Infuriated by what they saw as Boer cowardice and having borne the brunt of the casualties, the entire Swazi force abandoned the campaign and went home. Suddenly, President Burgers was on his own. On August 1st, the Boers advanced on Sekhukhune's main stronghold at Thaba Mosega. Now, the Bapedi had the advantage. Fighting on their home turf, Sekhukhune's warriors, armed with their new rifles, unleashed a withering fire from fortified positions. They used guerrilla tactics, melting into the landscape only to strike from unexpected angles. The Boer commando, used to open-field battles, was completely demoralized. Their artillery was useless. Faced with stiff resistance, their resolve crumbled. The attack stalled, and then it turned into a rout. On August 2nd, the commando disintegrated. Ignoring their president's pleas, the Boer farmers simply packed up and went home. The defeat was a national humiliation for the South African Republic. President Burgers returned in disgrace, his government bankrupt. The war hadn't just failed to crush Sekhukhune. It had exposed the fundamental weakness of the Boer state. For Sekhukhune, it was a triumphant victory. News of his success spread like wildfire, but his victory had unintended consequences. Across the border, another empire had been watching closely. The British had just been given the perfect excuse to intervene. The Boers' spectacular failure sent ripples all the way to London. The British Colonial Office had long wanted to unite Southern Africa into a single dominion under the Crown. The South African Republic's embarrassing defeat and bankruptcy provided the perfect justification to act. In 1877, Sir Theophilus Shepstone rode into the Transvaal's capital and annexed it for the British Empire. The primary evidence for the Republic's weakness? Its inability to subdue Sekhukhune. The irony was staggering. The British had initially condemned the Boers' war as an act of aggression. But now that the Transvaal was theirs, Sekhukhune's kingdom was suddenly considered part of the new British territory. British officials were confident Sekhukhune would be grateful. They sent envoys demanding he pay taxes and acknowledge British sovereignty. Sekhukhune's response was one of pure defiance. He had just defeated one colonial power. Why would he bend the knee to another? His independence was not negotiable. This refusal set the stage for the Second Sekhukhune War. The British consistently and disastrously underestimated him. Their first attempt to enforce their authority in March 1878 was a complete disaster. A force under a Captain Clark was ambushed at Magnet Heights and routed with heavy losses. Undeterred, the British planned a major campaign. From August to October 1878, a well-equipped force of 1,800 men under Colonel Rowlands tried to crush the Bapedi. But they faced the same brutal terrain. The Bapedi harassed their supply lines and launched lightning-fast raids. Rowlands's campaign became bogged down in disease, exhaustion, and the unnerving pressure of an enemy he could rarely see. In October, admitting failure, he withdrew. The failure of a second British expedition was a severe blow to imperial prestige. Sekhukhune's reputation soared. The Sekhukhune problem was now a full-blown crisis. The British tried yet again in mid-1879 under Colonel Lanyon, and again they failed. Two major British campaigns had been repelled. It was almost unbelievable. The British Empire, which was also fighting the Anglo-Zulu War, found itself unable to defeat this one king. The name Sekhukhune became a curse in the British camps. They needed a solution, and they needed it fast. It was time to call in their best man. With British prestige in southern Africa hanging by a thread, London sent for its most famous and ruthless imperial fixer, Sir Garnet Wolseley. Wolseley was the Victorian era's modern major general, a man known for meticulous planning and a belief in overwhelming force. He had just finished overseeing the Anglo-Zulu War and was now tasked with extinguishing the Sekhukhune problem for good. Wolseley had no intention of repeating past mistakes. His strategy was simple and brutal: assemble one of the largest colonial armies ever seen in the region and crush the Bapedi. This was a full-scale invasion. Wolseley gathered 2,000 disciplined British regulars, and in a bitter twist of irony, Boer volunteers, who now fought alongside the British to defeat the king who had once humiliated them. But the masterstroke of his plan was the enlistment of an enormous impi of 8,000 Swazi warriors, promised cattle and revenge. Wolseley was about to unleash a combined force of over 10,000 men. The plan was a giant pincer movement designed to encircle the Leolo Mountains and cut off any escape. In late November 1879, the massive army began its advance. The final battle raged from November 28th to December 2nd. It was a scene of apocalyptic violence. British artillery systematically bombarded the Bapedi strongholds. While the cannons roared, the Swazi warriors swarmed up the steep slopes, engaging the Bapedi in ferocious hand-to-hand combat. British regulars followed, using their superior firepower to pin down the defenders. Sekhukhune and his men fought with incredible bravery. From behind stone walls and from the mouths of caves, they poured constant fire on their assailants. They were defending their homes, their families, and their king. But courage was no match for the sheer, overwhelming numbers and industrial firepower arrayed against them. The defensive network that had served them so well began to collapse. The fighting was savage. It's estimated that around 1,000 Bapedi warriors were killed, including many of Sekhukhune's top commanders and several of his brothers. Amidst the chaos, Sekhukhune managed to escape the main fortress and hide in a maze of caves. But Wolseley was determined not to let him get away. On December 2nd, 1879, he was found. The great king, the defiant symbol of resistance, was captured and taken as a prisoner to Pretoria. The fortress had fallen. The king was in chains. The war was over. The capture of Sekhukhune was celebrated as a major triumph for the British Empire. Wolseley had succeeded where everyone else had failed. The nightmare had been contained. Sekhukhune was jailed in Pretoria, his kingdom disarmed and dismantled. But history in southern Africa is full of sharp turns. The Boers, resentful of British rule, soon rose up in the First Boer War of 1880 to 1881. In a stunning reversal, the Boers defeated the British. The peace treaty they signed, the Pretoria Convention, specifically stipulated that King Sekhukhune was to be released. And so, in 1881, the aging king was freed. He returned not to his mountain fortress, which lay in ruins, but to a new, designated location. His power was a shadow of what it once was. Yet, even in this diminished state, he remained a potent symbol. For one man, he was a symbol of a stolen birthright. Mampuru II, his half-brother, had never forgiven Sekhukhune for seizing the throne 2 decades earlier. He saw the old king's weakness as his chance for revenge. The final act of this tragedy came on the night of August 13th, 1882. Mampuru and his followers crept into the king's settlement and found him. There, the man who had defied armies and empires was assassinated, stabbed to death by his own brother. It was a bitter, ignominious end. Mampuru's triumph was short-lived. He was hunted down by the Boer authorities, not for killing a king, but for murder. He was arrested, tried, and hanged in November 1883. The story of Sekhukhune is a powerful reminder that history is filled with incredible figures whose stories of defiance deserve to be told. If you found this account as compelling as we did, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. It helps us bring you more tales of the leaders who challenged empires and shaped our world. So what is the legacy of Sekhukhune I? After his death, his kingdom was fractured, but the memory of his resistance endured. He was more than just a warrior king. He was a brilliant innovator who built a modern economic and military system designed specifically to counter colonial expansion. He was a statesman, a diplomat, and a general who understood the strategic power of his land. His impact was so profound that even the London Times, a paper not known for praising African leaders, acknowledged his bravery and the formidable threat he had posed. Today, Sekhukhune's name echoes through South Africa. He is remembered as a hero of anti-colonial resistance. The region that was once his kingdom is now the Sekhukhune District Municipality. And in a final poignant turn of history, the post-apartheid government of South Africa officially recognized his royal lineage, bringing a story of usurpation, resistance, and tragedy full circle. The tale of Sekhukhune is a testament to the fact that the story of an era is never just about the empires that dominate it. It's also about the courageous few who dared to stand against them.